Desire isn't just fire, it's shadow. Jung knew this. He saw how male desire, when repressed, doesn't disappear. It mutates into shame, into violence, into obsession. The latest data tells a stark story. A 2024 California survey revealed that 38% of young adults aged 18-30 reported having no sexual partners in the past year, an all-time high. Meanwhile, over 60% of men under 30 are now single, nearly double that of women. Yet among those who are sexually active, the inequality is extreme. The top 5% of men went from 38 to 50 lifetime partners in just a decade. But this isn't about sex, it's about soul. Jung understood that when a man approaches intimacy unconsciously, he doesn't just risk his body, he risks his essence. We've turned sex into spectacle, love into strategy, intimacy into a marketplace of validation. Most men feel empty afterward, drained instead of renewed. They give their bodies, but lose their spirits. What if the way most men approach intimacy is actually spiritual suicide? What if every unconscious encounter costs a piece of your soul? What if sex, at its deepest level, isn't about bodies at all, but about the exchange of something far more precious? Jung tried to warn us, but we were too busy performing to listen. When a man approaches a woman, he doesn't just offer his body. He offers his wounds, his hidden grief, his desperate need to be seen as whole when he feels broken inside. Most men don't realize this. They think they're offering pleasure, companionship, maybe love. But underneath, in the unconscious depths that Jung spent his life mapping, they're offering their shadow, their unhealed pain, their secret terror that they're not enough. Lust is often grief in disguise, that burning need, that restless hunger that drives men toward intimacy. What is it really? Strip away the biological imperatives, the cultural programming, the stories we tell ourselves. What's left? Longing. Pure, aching longing to be witnessed, to be accepted, to be held not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, to find in another person what they've lost in themselves. Research reveals this truth. Studies show that sexual satisfaction is dependent on both intimacy and sexual desire. But men often struggle to connect the two. While women's sexual desire emerges from emotional intimacy, men have been conditioned to separate the physical from the emotional, creating a false divide that leaves them spiritually hungry even when physically satisfied. Jung called this projection. We cast onto others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The man who chases validation through conquest is really chasing the acceptance he can't give himself. Here's what Jung understood that we've forgotten. Desire, at its deepest level, isn't about having someone else. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you've abandoned. When a man gives his body without consciousness, without presence, without understanding what he's really offering, he's not making love. He's making a sacrifice. He's bleeding out his life force onto the altar of someone else's approval. And afterward, he feels empty, drained, somehow less than he was before, because he's given away something precious without even knowing what it was. The ancient traditions understood this. They knew that sexual energy wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, creative, divine. They built temples around it, rituals around it, entire philosophies around the sacred exchange of life force between two conscious beings. But we've lost that understanding. We've reduced the sacred to the secular, the ritual to the recreational. And in doing so, we've turned something that could heal us into something that wounds us. This brings us to a deeper question. If desire is really about the soul, then what happens when souls meet? Jung believed that intimacy creates a unique space where the unconscious reveals itself. But this revelation can be both healing and dangerous. Jung believed that intimacy exposes the unconscious. When two people come together sexually, they don't just share bodies, they share psyches. Shadows merge, wounds touch wounds. The masks we wear in daily life fall away, and what emerges is raw, unfiltered truth. This is why sex can be so healing, and why it can be so damaging. When a man enters intimacy unconsciously, driven by need rather than presence, by emptiness rather than fullness, he's not sharing his life force. He's hemorrhaging it. Sex without presence drains the spirit. Think of it as an energy exchange. Every time you're intimate with someone, you're trading something essential. Not just physical pleasure, but psychic material, emotions, memories, the residue of every person they've been with before you, the echo of every wound they carry. Jung understood that we're not separate beings bumping into each other in the night. We're interconnected at levels most of us can't perceive. When you touch someone's body, you're touching their story, their trauma, their unprocessed pain. This is why some encounters leave you feeling elevated, expanded, more yourself than before, and why others leave you feeling contaminated, diminished, somehow less alive. When a man approaches intimacy as performance, focused on technique, on impressing, on proving his worth, he's operating from his mind, not his soul. He's giving his body but withholding his essence. And what he receives in return is equally hollow. But when a man approaches intimacy as ritual, present, conscious, offering not just his desire, but his full being, something sacred happens. The exchange becomes regenerative rather than depleting. Both partners leave more whole than they arrived. Jung called this the transcendent function, the miraculous alchemy that occurs when opposites meet in consciousness rather than unconsciousness. When shadow integrates with light, when desire serves not the ego, but the soul. Most men have never experienced this. They've been trained to see sex as conquest, as release, as validation. They've been taught to give their bodies, but guard their hearts, to perform pleasure, but avoid vulnerability. And then they wonder why they feel so empty afterward, why the hunger never gets satisfied, no matter how many partners they have, why the more they give themselves away, the less of themselves they seem to have. Because they're not giving themselves at all. They're giving their performance, their mask, their idea of what a man should be in bed. But why are men so afraid of this deeper intimacy? What makes vulnerability feel more dangerous than physical nakedness? The answer lies in what Jung called the shadow. The shadow emerges when masks fall away, in the vulnerable moments of intimacy, when defenses are down, when pretenses dissolve. A man's deepest wounds rise to the surface. The parts of himself he's spent years trying to hide, to deny, to overcome, through will or performance or sheer determination. Jung knew that the shadow isn't evil. It's simply unconscious. It's the repository of everything we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves, everything we've pushed down into the darkness because it didn't fit our image of who we thought we should be. For most men, this includes their sensitivity, their need for tenderness, their fear of abandonment, their grief over the father who was absent, the mother who was critical, the childhood that taught them that vulnerability equals weakness. Research confirms what Jung observed. Over 30% of men will experience depression at some point during their lifetime, and about 9% report having feelings of depression or anxiety every day. Yet men are conditioned from childhood to hide these emotions, despite being told to man up. Studies show that men experience emotions at the same level that women do. They've simply learned to suppress them. These wounds don't disappear, Because we ignore them, they fester. They leak into every relationship, every encounter, every moment of intimacy. Most men fear being emotionally naked more than physically naked. You can take off your clothes. That's easy. But taking off the armor you've built around your heart, revealing the scared child underneath the strong exterior, admitting that you don't have it all figured out, that you're not the rock everyone expects you to be, that's terrifying. So instead, men perform. They play roles. The confident lover, the skilled partner, the man who knows exactly what he's doing and never feels uncertain or afraid. But the shadow sees through every performance. It knows that beneath the confidence is terror. Beneath the skill is desperate need. Beneath the knowing is a profound confusion about what it means to be a man in a world that seems to have forgotten. And in intimate moments, when the performance becomes impossible to maintain, the shadow emerges. Sometimes as anger, sudden, inexplicable rage that seems to come from nowhere. Sometimes as withdrawal, an abrupt disconnection, a pulling away just when closeness should feel most natural. Sometimes as shame, deep, soul-crushing shame that says, if she really knew me, she would run. Jung taught that the path to wholeness requires befriending the shadow, not eliminating it, not transcending it, but integrating it. Acknowledging the wounded parts of ourselves not as flaws to be fixed, but as aspects of our humanity to be accepted and eventually transformed. Until a man does this work, until he faces his shadow with compassion rather than judgment, every intimate encounter becomes a battlefield between who he really is and who he thinks he should be. And in that battle, everyone loses. Because intimacy thrives on authenticity, not performance. On presence, not pretense. On the courage to be seen in all your imperfection. Yet even when men begin to recognize their shadow, another trap awaits. One that's perhaps even more dangerous because it masquerades as love itself, the unconscious seeking of validation through another person's approval. Here's what Jung understood that we've forgotten. When you don't love yourself, you can't truly love anyone else. You can need them. You can want them. You can perform love beautifully. But you can't give what you don't have. Watch a man who's seeking validation through intimacy. See how he transforms in the presence of someone he's attracted to. How he becomes whoever he thinks they want him to be. How he studies their reactions, adjusts his behavior, crafts himself into the image of their desire. This isn't love. This is negotiation. It's a transaction disguised as romance, a performance disguised as authenticity. Research reveals the extent of this crisis. Studies show that validation-seeking behavior stems from childhood experiences, where emotional validation from parents was either absent or inconsistent. When children don't receive adequate emotional validation, they struggle to develop emotional awareness as adults. This creates a cycle where external validation becomes not just desired, but necessary for basic emotional stability. When love becomes a performance, the soul starves. Jung spoke of this as inflation, the tendency to identify with an idealized image rather than accepting our full humanity. The man who inflates himself into the perfect lover is actually cutting himself off from the very vulnerability that makes real intimacy possible. Because real intimacy isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about showing up as you are, wounded, uncertain, beautifully imperfect, and trusting that you're worthy of love, not despite your flaws, but because of your full humanity. Most men approach intimacy from a place of deficit. They're trying to fill something that's missing, to heal something that's broken, to prove something that's been questioned. They're seeking in another person what they've never learned to give themselves. And this creates a kind of energetic hunger that no partner can ever satisfy. Because the emptiness isn't really about them. It's about the relationship you have with yourself. The man who doesn't know his own worth will always need external validation to feel valuable. The man who hasn't learned to comfort his own pain will always need someone else to soothe him. The man who can't accept his own imperfections will always need a partner who sees him as flawless. These are impossible standards. They turn intimacy into a constant audition, love into a performance review, sex into a test that can never be passed once and for all. Jung called this projection. We project onto others the qualities we refuse to develop in ourselves. The man who seeks the perfect partner is really seeking to become perfect himself. But here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop needing someone else to complete you, you become capable of truly choosing them. Not from emptiness, but from fullness. Not from need, but from desire. Not because you have to, but because you want to. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming whole within yourself so that relationship becomes not a necessity, but a choice. Not a desperate clinging, but a conscious offering. But how does a man begin this journey from validation seeking to self-possession? What does the path of healing actually look like? A man heals when he no longer needs to be chosen. This is the great awakening that most men spend their entire lives avoiding. The recognition that the love you've been seeking outside yourself has been waiting inside you all along. That the acceptance you've been performing for has always been available through your own compassion. It's not that external love doesn't matter. It's that external love can only nourish you if you already have a foundation of self-love to build upon. Otherwise, it's like pouring water into a broken vessel. No matter how much you receive, it always leaks out. The healing begins when a man stops running from his own company, when he learns to sit with his loneliness without immediately reaching for distractions. When he begins to treat his own pain with the same tenderness he would offer a wounded child. This is shadow work, not the dramatic, mystical process that some traditions make it out to be, but the simple, courageous act of turning toward what you've been turning away from, of feeling what you've been numbing, of grieving what you've been denying. For most men, this means grieving the childhood they never had. The father who was present, but emotionally absent. The mother who loved them but couldn't show them how to love themselves. The culture that taught them to be strong, but never taught them what true strength looks like. It means grieving the parts of themselves they've had to abandon to fit into a world that prizes performance over presence. The sensitivity they've had to hide, the creativity they've had to suppress, the dreams they've had to sacrifice on the altar of respectability. This grief is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the soul's way of composing what's been lost, so that what remains can be fully claimed. From there, intimacy becomes sacred. When a man no longer needs someone else to validate his worth, he can offer his desire as a gift rather than a need. When he's no longer performing to be accepted, he can be present to what's actually happening between him and his partner. This is when sex becomes ritual rather than transaction. When bodies become temples rather than objects. When the exchange of pleasure becomes an exchange of presence, of life force, of sacred energy. The man who has done his healing work approaches intimacy differently. He doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't need to impress anyone. He doesn't need to be perfect or perform perfectly. He simply needs to be present, to offer himself fully, not just his body, but his attention, his care, his full humanity, to receive not just physical pleasure, but the gift of another person's trust, their vulnerability, their willingness to share sacred space. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function. Not transcending the body, but transcending the ego's need to control, to impress, to validate itself through another's response. When this happens, both partners are transformed, because they're not just sharing bodies, they're sharing souls. They're creating together something larger than either could create alone. This is the intimacy that heals rather than wounds, that nourishes rather than depletes, that leaves both people more themselves than they were before. But even for the man who has begun this work of healing and integration, one final challenge remains. In a world where conscious partners are rare, how does he protect his newfound wholeness? How does he choose partners wisely? Jung understood something that modern psychology has largely forgotten. We're not as separate as we think we are. At the level of the unconscious, we're constantly exchanging energy, emotion, psychic material. When you're intimate with someone, you're not just touching their body, you're touching their entire energetic field. Sex with chaotic or wounded partners can leave a man drained, lost. This isn't mystical speculation, it's observable reality. You've felt it yourself. The way certain encounters leave you feeling depleted, confused, somehow less than you were before. The way you can absorb someone else's anxiety, their desperation, their unprocessed trauma. Research supports this phenomenon. Studies on emotional contagion show that we literally absorb the emotional states of those around us, particularly in intimate contexts. When you're intimate with someone who's operating from their wounds rather than their wholeness, those wounds become temporarily yours. The data on loneliness and sexual behavior reveals something troubling. Sexual loneliness among men is increasing globally. In Finland, the number of men who have trouble finding a sexual partner doubled from 1992 to 2015. Studies show that sexual loneliness decreases self-esteem and positive mood in both men and women. But for men specifically, it often manifests as anger and aggression. This is why discernment matters. Not moral judgment, but energetic wisdom. The ability to sense what someone is offering beyond their physical presence. To feel whether an encounter will nourish you or drain you, heal you or harm you. Most men have never been taught this discernment. They've been conditioned to see attraction as enough, chemistry as sufficient, physical desire as the only criteria that matters. But attraction can be deceptive. Chemistry can be toxic. Physical desire can lead you toward people who will diminish rather than enhance your life force. Jung taught that we're often attracted to people who carry the same wounds we do, not because they'll heal us, but because they'll activate our familiar patterns of pain. The unavailable woman who reminds you of your emotionally distant mother. The chaotic partner who recreates the unstable home you grew up in. These attractions feel like fate, like destiny, like the deepest kind of love. But they're really repetition compulsions, the psyche's attempt to heal old wounds by recreating familiar dynamics. The problem is, you can't heal trauma by repeating it. You can't fix childhood abandonment by choosing partners who abandon you. You can't resolve your relationship with an emotionally unavailable parent by dating emotionally unavailable people. Discernment protects vitality and soul. The man who has learned discernment doesn't just ask, "Am I attracted to this person?" He asks deeper questions. Does this person enhance my life force or drain it? Do they inspire me to be more myself or less? Do they meet me from their wholeness or their woundedness? This isn't about finding perfect people. perfect people don't exist. It's about finding conscious people. People who are aware of their wounds and actively working to heal them. People who take responsibility for their own emotional state, rather than expecting you to manage it for them. When you're intimate with someone who's operating from consciousness rather than compulsion, the exchange is regenerative. You both leave more alive, more awake, more connected to your own essential nature. But when you're intimate with someone who's operating from their wounds, the exchange becomes depleting. You give your life force, but receive only their neediness in return. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of doing your own psychological work before attempting deep intimacy with others. Not because you need to be perfect, but because you need to be conscious, aware of your patterns, responsible for your wounds, capable of meeting another person from your center rather than your need. And this brings us full circle, back to where we began, with the recognition that desire at its deepest level is not about consumption, but about creation. Not about taking, but about giving. Not about filling an emptiness, but about sharing a fullness. Sex is not a game. It's a ritual of the soul. And if a man doesn't know who he is before the act, he will lose himself in it. This is what Jung tried to tell us. That desire, at its deepest level, is sacred. That intimacy is not recreation, but transformation. That what we do with our bodies affects not just our physical health, but our spiritual well-being. We've forgotten this. We've turned the sacred into the profane, the ritual into the recreational. We've reduced the profound exchange of life force to a simple transaction of pleasure. And in doing so, we've lost ourselves. We've become empty men pursuing empty encounters, seeking in others what we've never learned to find in ourselves. But it doesn't have to be this way. Jung showed us another path, the path of consciousness, of integration, of meeting our desire not with shame or suppression, but with understanding and discernment. This path requires courage, the courage to face your shadow, to feel your wounds, to grieve what you've lost and claim what remains, to stop performing love and start embodying it. It requires you to do the work that most men avoid their entire lives. The work of becoming whole within yourself, so that relationship becomes not a necessity, but a choice. Not a desperate attempt to fill what's missing, but a conscious decision to share what's abundant. When you do this work, intimacy transforms. It becomes not about taking, but about giving. Not about validation, but about celebration. Not about proving your worth, but about sharing your gifts. This is the intimacy that heals, that nourishes, that leaves both partners more alive than they were before. This is the intimacy that Jung envisioned, where two whole people meet, not from their wounds, but from their wholeness. Where the exchange of physical pleasure becomes an exchange of sacred energy. Where sex becomes not performance, but prayer. But it starts with you, with your willingness to stop running from yourself and start returning to yourself. With your courage to feel what you've been avoiding and heal what you've been denying. The woman you're meant to be with, the intimacy you're meant to experience. It's all waiting on the other side of this work. But first, you must reclaim yourself. You must remember who you are when no one is watching. You must learn to love your own company before you can truly offer it to someone else. Reflect, reclaim, and return to yourself before offering yourself to anyone else. Because the world doesn't need another man seeking validation through intimacy. It needs men who are so full of their own presence, their own life force, their own sacred energy, that they can offer it as a gift rather than a need. It needs men who understand that desire is not the enemy, but the guide. not the problem, but the solution. Not the shadow to be feared, but the light to be integrated. Jung knew this. He tried to warn us. But we're still learning to listen. The question is, will you?